Hi, this is Ken Parker welcoming you to another episode of Common Ground, the policy roundtable where we bring together a panel with diverse views on issues of concern to Newton residents and try to hammer out our differences. For those of you who are new to our show, the format is very simple. First, I introduce a topic, then we go around the table once with each panelist expressing a viewpoint. I then select the two panelists who disagree the most strongly and ask them to speak directly to one another in hopes of finding some area of agreement. At the end of each segment, I give an assessment of how we did at finding common ground and put in my 2 cents on the topic. At least that's the way the show usually works. Tonight, we have a special treat and a little bit of a different format. We have a very special guest, the Newton City Council President, Mark Laredo. Mark, welcome to Common Ground.
And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. It's
always my pleasure.
You've been back many times. You were one of our very first guests. I believe you may have been chair of the school committee
Probably
at the time. Back when we started the show, I think in the, 1800s, was it?
I'm not that old, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, no, it might have been back,
Always good.
close to 15 years ago, though.
It's been a while.
And of course, you were back very recently in talking about the charter issues, but we were just focused on the charter petition and didn't get a chance to talk about a lot of the other things going on. And of course, you're newly board president, or council president, it's back from January.
That's right.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So now you're a bigwig, you get a one-on-one interview.
You know, I just have to help manage 23 other people. We're all equals.
Yes, right.
First
among equals,
That's
right? And you also, of course, are professionally a lawyer at the Boston firm of Laredo and Smith.
That's right.
You being the Laredo.
I am.
And what kind of law do you practice there?
I practice primarily a business litigation, general business law. I do a lot of work with closely held corporations. My partner does a lot of white-collar criminal defense work, government investigations. That's primarily.
So you're representing businesses in court cases and civil litigation.
We represent businesses in all sorts of different issues, whether it's civil or criminal.
Oh, really?
We're problem solvers. That's how we view ourselves.
And how long have you been working?
I've been a lawyer now for 30 plus years. I founded this firm with my original partner over 20 years ago.
Wow.
Before that, I worked at a couple of other Boston firms, and I was an assistant attorney general in the Attorney General's office.
Which Attorney General?
Under Jim Shannon. So that dates me a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit back. Well, 30 years.
I was in the criminal bureau back there.
Well,
and that was a great job.
That's terrific. Yeah. Well, thank you for that history. And I know more recently in Newton, you were the chair of the Land Use Committee for a few years at least. Was it 2 terms you did that for?
I did. I served, politically, I first served in the school committee for 8 years, including my last year as chair of the committee.
Which was probably your first year on Common Ground.
It probably was. I took a couple of years off, and then I ran for the city council. I'm now in my 7th year on the city council, and before becoming president of the council, I chaired the land use committee for 4 years.
And did a terrific job, by the way.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I mean, I've got to say, of all the people, we've had a lot of great people around this table, but you're smart, articulate, and always straightforward and accessible. So it's always been, whether we've agreed or not, Mark, over the years, it's been a pleasure talking with you and working with you and having you at this table.
I appreciate that, and I always say to people, I grew up in Newton. My wife and I chose to live here and raise our family here. This is a fabulous community, and I feel just incredibly fortunate to be able to serve the public, and that's what this job is.
Well, thank you for putting the time in, because people don't realize how many hours it takes to be just a counselor, let alone council president. It is a huge amount of work. I once did the math. You make less than the minimum wage.
You make far less than the minimum wage. And I always say there's people who don't necessarily think there's a great use of time. My wife, my law partners recognize how much time I'm away. But I feel very privileged to be able to do this job.
Well, thank you for giving back to the community. It's a benefit to everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Now that I've said that, let's get into.
Fair enough. Go right ahead.
All right. Well, there are so many issues in Newton, and frankly, with less local journalism, I think it's fair to say, than we used to have, fewer reporters at city meetings. I think it becomes more incumbent on shows like this to try to report a little news out, or at least provide information to the public.
I agree with that, and I'll just say as an aside, it is not good for this community that we have diminished coverage at the only local newspaper, The Tab. As difficult as it is sometimes for people in public office to have to deal with reporters, We are better off, much better off as a community, and we're better off as
a
governing
democracy
body if we have a vigorous press, because it keeps us on our toes. They ask tough questions. I think it's very important, and it's great that you have a show like this, which at least gets some of the issues out there in a different format.
We do the best we can, but I'm going to try, for that reason, Mark, we're going to try to get through a lot of issues.
Go right ahead.
So let's start with the most recent, last in, first out, as it were. Monday night, the Newton City Council debated the issue of whether to place a question on the ballot that would remove the requirement that Newton have a minimum of 8 retail recreational marijuana stores. As I understand it, and you can correct me if I get any of this wrong, the state law that passed by ballot initiative has been interpreted and modified somewhat by the legislature, but where we're left is communities where the local vote was more than 50% in favor of passing the state ballot initiative a couple of years ago are now in a situation where they need a public citywide vote if they don't want to have a number of recreational retail marijuana stores that is 1/4 of their package store liquor licenses, and for Newton that works out to about 8.
That's right.
So there was a signature drive to get this, or and I guess there's an ongoing signature drive to get this question on the ballot in Newton, the Opt-Out Newton campaign, but they need 6,000 signatures to force the issue before the city council, and then if the city council doesn't agree to put it on the ballot, another 3,000. So they tried to shortcut that process a little bit by asking very nicely of the city council with a 50-signature petition to place the question on this November's ballot. And the city council very politely said, no, thank you, go get your 6,000 signatures. Is that a fair characterization?
It is, and you know, let me try to put this in a little bit broader perspective. The marijuana law, the legalization of marijuana, that's different than decriminalizing it, was passed by referendum in 2016. I personally think that the question itself is indicative of why generally referendums are not a good way of making law.
I've got a confession right now, Mark. When I voted for that, I was thinking about my own experience interning at the U.S. Attorney's Office and seeing young people, 19, 20 years old, being put away for possession, no violence, no selling to anyone else, these mandatory minimums for possessing things like marijuana. And so I voted yes, saying I don't want anyone going to jail for having this stuff or growing a little of it in their house or something. But I did not vote to have residential marijuana stores in Newton. And I just looked back at the summary of the question. It didn't say anything about if you vote for this, you're going to be forced to have them in your community. So I was very surprised. But my confession is I should have read the entire statute. But it's
it's a daunting task for legislators, never mind the general public, to really read and analyze a complex issue. The general concept, should we legalize marijuana in the Commonwealth, I think is a question that can be put to the voters and let the voters vote up or down on it. But the question that was posed was much more complex and created a whole variety of other issues, including the fact about how you opt out and things of that nature. And in my mind, having crafted legislation as a city councilor and worked on legislation, there's a lot of give and take over the details, and as you can appreciate as an attorney, the details and the language make a big difference, and that is missing, and frankly was missing from this referendum.
So I'm just curious. Our viewers may or may not be aware that you had some travel issues.
I did.
You were not there Monday night, so the suspense is killing all of us. And how would you have voted had you been there?
I would have put opt-out on the ballot. I think my read of the referendum question was pretty straightforward. It was a legalization of marijuana and a specific mechanism that if the city council wanted to put it on the ballot, they could do so. I don't think we needed a citizen petition to put it on the council. The city council in its wisdom could do that, and regardless of whether we had 50 signatures or 500 signatures or zero, I think it's an important enough question, and I don't put questions on the ballot lightly, but because of the way this statute was drafted, it takes away the power of the city council to otherwise legislate. And so I would have put it on. I think putting the 2 to 4 on is a
I should explain
compromise.
for our viewers, the city council did not vote the opt-out onto the ballot,
not.
but they put an alternative, which would be to say there will be a range of 2 to 4 retail marijuana stores, a minimum of 2, maximum of 4 in the city. And that will be on the ballot for people to vote whether they want to impose that limitation.
It will be. And you know, this is a perfect example of how very reasonable minds and very well-intended folks can differ on an issue. There are some people who feel very strongly that marijuana stores should not be in Newton. And there's others who feel that we should have as many as we want. And they're legitimate points of view. Different people
and
have
we should have a vote on it.
And we should have a vote on that. What will be very interesting is if the opt-out folks get the 6,000 signatures they need, which, as you know, is
It's
a
a
very
Herculean task,
difficult
especially
task.
during the summer. So many Newton residents are on the Cape or in Portugal or
well, it's a difficult task, but if they do get it on the
how
ballot,
long did it take the charter folks to get that on the ballot? That took years to gather those
it took years
signatures.
to get it on the ballot. I think it will be a very daunting task for them, but if they do get it on the ballot, the unknown question is,
What if both questions pass?
What if both questions pass, and how does that work?
Well, the council would have a chance to prioritize that, I guess, when they.
It could, but that will be something that we're going to have some very intricate discussions with the law department about.
There's another twist to this. What if the opt-out question gets the signatures, but too late to go on this November's ballot? Some permits are issued, and then it's on, say, next November's ballot. What happens? Are they grandfathered in? How does it?
You know, I have spent a fairly considerable time talking to our legal department, and we have a very good legal department in the city of Newton. The answers are really unknown, and I suspect...
I heard that the other night. People kept trying to get an answer from the law, and Weeda Young kept saying, we just don't know. It's a gray area. And people didn't want to hear that for an answer.
Weeda Young is an outstanding lawyer, and she's absolutely right. It is unknown. And good lawyers, as you know, need to tell their clients at
And
times
some clients don't want to hear
that we do not have the answer. I suspect that there's going to be a number of marijuana-related cases that go up to our state Supreme Judicial Court, and ultimately it will issue one or more rulings which will guide both the Cannabis Commission and the cities and towns as they try to deal with the tricky issues surrounding marijuana.
So just quickly, a couple of those other tricky issues. I wanted to... one of the things that I thought was particularly, I'm going to use the word sneaky about that ballot question that wasn't in their advertising or the publicity, is that it really preempts a lot of the local rights that we have as a municipality and as a city council to do in other areas. So they basically got what the tobacco industry would have loved to have gotten, which is the ability to prevent local regulation of their product. And I say that as someone who wrote the Smoke-Free Newton Ordinance umpteen years ago when I was my first term on the city council, and we regulated retail displays of tobacco. We regulated the procedures for getting a tobacco sales permit for a retailer. We had all kinds of regulations about it, and we were able to do that because we weren't preempted by the state. But this ballot question preempts the regulation of what are called edibles, for example, and a number, and has a minimum. I mean, the idea that there would be a minimum of a certain type of business is kind of shocking to me. I somewhat tongue-in-cheek emailed members of the city council, you may have seen this, saying, well, if we're going to have a minimum of that, why don't we have some minimums for other things? I think we should have a minimum of one miniature golf course and one bowling alley in Newton.
Well, I think we can't force the marijuana industry to put 8 stores in Newton, but certainly if we are obligated to allow 8 stores.
But how does that work as a practical matter, Mark? Does that mean you have to grant the first 8 permits? What if you say no and then no one else comes along?
Well, then we won't have them. But again, that's going to be very tricky. And I think we're in the middle of some special permits now, so I don't want to comment on any specific matter.
No, I just mean in general.
Generally, that's going to be hard. And
a minimum in a marketplace where there may not be that many. No one wants to put a miniature golf course in Newton, apparently.
Ken, a good example of why we don't or shouldn't be legislating by referendum. It's no different than legalizing gambling, which we've done in this state, and legalizing casinos, which we've done in this state.
Also bad ideas, by the
way. Which I personally am not in favor of. But again, at least with casinos, local communities have control over whether or not they allow casinos in. That's not the case with marijuana. And the law was written, I think, the proponents of it wrote the law that way for a reason.
Preempting local control.
Absolutely.
That's why I use the word sneaky, because they weren't upfront about how they'd written it in their summaries and in their advertising. And maybe that's typical, but I think it was disingenuous.
You know, look, folks feel very passionately, as you probably saw Monday night, the number of emails that I received and we received on the marijuana issue was enormous, and people feel very passionately on both sides of the issue.
I just want to say, one of the counselors, and I won't name a name because I don't want to call anybody out, but said, basically, you'd have to be stupid and ignorant to have voted yes on the thing in 2016 and now not want now want to opt out. And I'm in that case, I'm guilty as charged, because I thought we were voting to legalize it the way it's legal to have adult entertainment, naked dancing, essentially. There's some in the state. It's not against the law, but I wouldn't want one in Newton.
Yeah, I personally don't think that the average voter would have paid that level of attention to the detail in the referendum about that. I think it was, as with many other referendum questions, presented as, do you favor legalizing the possession and cultivation of marijuana in the Commonwealth? And the voters said yes. And you know, whether I agree with that decision or not doesn't matter. The voters have spoken. We have to respect that.
Well, again, I felt a little tricked and used there, but the other piece of this is the candy and the soda and the stuff that looks like it's designed. You know, these are candy bars, chocolate bars, gummy bears with marijuana in them, with cannabis in them. And soda with cannabis in them. If the tobacco industry said they were going to make a chocolate bar with tobacco in it, or a soda with tobacco in it, we'd all go crazy. How did they slip that past us?
You know, I think again,
and we can't regulate it at the local level.
Again,
apparently.
It's because it was done via a referendum question, a fairly complicated referendum question, and that was all in there. And because of that, we're now stuck with certain things in the law, which I, again, agree with you is unfortunate. There's a big difference in my mind between first of all, there's a big difference between decriminalizing it, which we had, and legalizing it. And I'm never in favor of having laws on the books that people don't obey. And with the marijuana laws, there was since a significant segment of the population that was not obeying the law. That's not good.
All right.
But anyways, marijuana for another day, probably.
Debating marijuana you can come back when we have a panel on that. You're always welcome at this table,
We're going to be debating marijuana for a while in this
and probably all these issues. So let's change gears a little bit. And when I say change gears, I'm referring to what I call welcoming killer robots into our community. Killer robots being self-driving cars. They are robots, and they can kill people. They're basically 2-ton robots that we've apparently decided to become guinea pigs to. I mean, and tell me if this is wrong. There's a pilot program to test them that Newton has opted into. We weren't required to, and I've asked now about 8 people around this table. What's the argument for doing this? Why would you want to be the testing ground for a potentially dangerous thing like that in our community with our kids walking to school and crossing our streets?
I think we ought to be very careful not to get a level of hysteria. I don't.
I'm totally hysterical.
I'm not.
I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek, obviously, in calling them killer robots, but. There was a death in the testing of a pedestrian. And was the pedestrian doing the right thing? No, they were probably jaywalking. Anyone who has never jaywalked, raise your hand, right? But my point is, in the early stages of a new technology, there can be a higher degree of uncertainty. That seems like the worst possible time to have these in a densely populated residential community.
I think we need to use our judgment, and I'm sure the mayor and the administration will use their judgment in terms of when and where driverless cars are used.
Are there any streets in Newton, Mark, that don't have the potential to have pedestrians crossing them?
There's always some streets that are less likely. A Route 9, for example, is although it's a state highway, is less likely to have pedestrians. I want to see much more details about testing, but look, we can't be afraid of tech.
Just please make the case for me why this would
We
be a good
can't
idea.
we can't be afraid of technology.
Right, but there's an appropriate place. There's, you could have a big tract of land out in the West where these things could be tested.
You certainly can do that, but at some point you're going to have to take it off the big tract of land and actually put it in a real life setting.
And my question is, why would we want that setting to be Newton? Why do we want to be the guinea pigs on this? If someone else wants to volunteer, what's in it for us? Or is there a financial payment? What are we getting out of it?
I don't know the answer to that, but I will tell you that driverless cars are probably the wave of the future. All right.
The only question mark is how distant future before they get them safe enough.
And that's a real. I'm not a scientist, but that's a real a fair question. I suspect it's not going to be the next 2 or 3 years, but it's not going to be 50 years either. And
I think that's probably right, somewhere between 3 and 50.
And it may be 5 to 10 years before we start seeing the technology. We may start to see the technology in increments. We already have that now with cars that are built with certain driverless
automatic
features.
braking, certainly lane change warnings. That is all true. That is an excellent point, Mark. But as a lawyer, you know that sometimes there's a question before you, and the question, the first question is, what's the question? And so to me, the question is, why would we want this?
And the devil's in the details, as it often is. And I think you need to look. You need to look at the details.
Okay, I haven't seen them yet.
Nor have I.
Okay, if there is an argument that you come across for why this is good for Newton, please email it to me, because I'm going to keep asking people this question, and maybe if you've come up with it, we'll have you back on.
If I get an answer, I'll be happy to share it with you.
Once you've seen those details, so far it is mind-boggling to me that we would volunteer to be the test grounds for this.
And I don't view it as negatively as you do, Ken. I think we are a progressive community. This is an important technology. It actually has some profound abilities to change the way we do things. Think, for example, of an elderly parent who is no longer able to safely drive.
I think that when it's a mature technology, you're absolutely right. All I'm questioning is whether we want to be the testing ground.
Well, that's a fair question. I'll try to get more information for you.
Thank you. I'll look forward to that. Next question. Let's change gears again. So you see what I did with the gears before?
The gears are fine.
Thank you. Let's talk about the city's finances a little bit. This is a perennial issue in Newton. We have had many reports on the long-term financial sustainability based on our revenue sources. There was, there was the Finance and Management Working Group report and the Blue Ribbon Commission, and then they called the Red Ribbon Commission, which is the one that now Mayor Fuller chaired. I don't think she likes that name. She was called something else. I can't remember the real name, so I just call it that because that's what everybody referred to it as. But there's been a series, and they've all said, oh, we've got these structural deficits, and we have increasing energy costs, and we have increasing healthcare costs, and our revenues aren't going up at the same rate. And so, I mean, there's the broader question of, are we on a sustainable financial track? Do we just need overrides periodically every few years to adjust our trajectory? I guess that's part one of the question. And the other is, are we addressing the underlying causes of these problems?
Well, I think we have a new mayor who is very acutely aware and quite knowledgeable of fiscal issues, which is great. Generally speaking, I think we are on a sound financial setting or footing in the city. We have a reasonably good plan for getting our pension liabilities fully funded. It's going to take a number of years.
What about the pensions are one thing. The other, the post-retirement health care benefit, that's the $800 million gorilla, right?
That's the huge number. And it's an issue because, for many years, the city entered into contracts.
By the way, am I right? Is it currently actually?
I don't know if it's 800, but it's
million?
A huge number. It's probably 600-700 million. I may be off a million or so. But the real problem, Ken, is that for years we entered into contracts which provided pension benefits and health insurance benefits for workers as they retired, which is a good thing. Frankly, in in the private sector now, we don't do that
Right.
anymore.
Well, the companies that used to, the big car companies, had bankruptcies and
there are very few employers who do that. Now, there are other means in the private sector of providing for retirement,
401ks
401k plans where employers make a contribution on behalf of employees.
But on the OPEB issue, there was a specific report that actually, I believe, now Mayor Fuller led the effort on, maybe authored and sought other experts, but we've had outside auditors recommend that we set up a fund, which the city did a couple of years ago, and then fund it at a rate which I don't think, at least last I heard, we were nowhere near the recommended funding level. Is there a plan to get us to the
Mayor Warren put a plan in place to do some funding. I expect Mayor Fuller will probably modify that plan, be my expectation, and try to work on it. But that is the single biggest issue facing us financially, and it's a difficult issue because the effects it doesn't have an impact today, but it has a huge impact.
No, it's politically very difficult, right?
10,
to say
20,
we're going
30
to spend today's taxpayers' money to prevent a disaster for tomorrow's taxpayers.
And it's much like infrastructure issues, which we've done a much better job of tackling in recent years. But convincing people to borrow money now, pay for things over time, so you can get your infrastructure in shape is tough. We are hampered in this state by Proposition 2.5. Proposition 2.5 does some good things. It forces municipalities to think lean and mean. But on the other hand, it constrains us to, frankly, an artificial number. And if we are in a situation as we are now, where we have a fair amount of new growth in the city, and you know this, new growth is when you are having a lot of construction going on, you're expanding.
But that's not in the 2.5 cap. That's 2.5 plus new growth.
Right, and that's why our budgets are able to grow at a 4 or 5% increase per year, because we've had all that new growth. If we get to a situation where the economy is not doing so well in a few years and the new growth drops off, then we're going to be in a very difficult situation because we're limited by Prop 2.5.
So that you're getting right to the core of the long-term sustainability question, which is whether our tax revenue goes up at the same rate as our costs. One of the things that plays into that, of course, is the ratio of ratables to non-ratables. In other words, of commercial to residential development. And I mean, it's been years since I ran the numbers on this, but as you know, commercial properties taxed at approximately twice the rate as residential, and commercial property in Newton, and commercial property, of course, does not impose some of the costs on our system that residential does, the greatest of which is these cute little humans that we have living in many of our houses that take about $15,000 a year to educate in our public schools. I think that's the last number I heard. I don't know if that's still on the
Probably
mark.
a little higher than that now.
But so the math I ran, and this was years ago, was that residential development had to be something like $1.2 million per family unit before it was a rateable. In other words, the property taxes at about 1% on a $1.2 million house. We're going to bring in whatever it was, $12,000 a year in taxes, and that on average would be enough to pay for the services the people in that house were using. I think it's probably over $2 million now, but the point is, residential development's usually not a rateable. Commercial is a rateable, and it's why communities with a higher commercial to residential ratio don't need as many 2.5 overrides as we have. How is this playing into our development strategy?
It's an excellent question. My personal belief is we're not doing enough commercial development in the city. Much of the development that we're seeing along our major corridors, Washington Street, Riverside, Northland Project on Needham Street, is defined as technically mixed use, but if you look at these projects, they're
primarily residential. That's what.
And I happen to think that's not. I don't think that's a good idea. I think it is. We do not want to have a series of state office parks or state office districts like downtowns used to have, they're changing, that dried up at 5 or 6 o'clock at night. Maybe you'd have a few residents, a few restaurants, things like
Sure.
that, but you really had no one there. That doesn't create a vibrant life to a city. At the same time, if all we're doing is putting first floor retail in and 3, 4, 5 stories of housing, we are providing housing, an important need, but we're taking our very scarce commercial land,
Like right there in the heart of Newtonville.
and we're not utilizing it well.
What's the ratio in that Washington Street
It's
project?
not good. It's not good. In my view, I would have liked to see that project be much more commercial. And
Are people talking about this more? To me, this seems like
They
the
are.
number one issue in terms of the long-term fiscal health of the city.
you know, there's a lot of tensions out there, and there's tensions in terms of a need for housing, perceived and a real need for housing. We have a population. Boston, and when we talk about Boston, we're not just talking about the city of Boston, but really the surrounding areas is a very hot area right now. We have companies coming here. We have companies that are growing. We have a vibrant medical industry, biotech, university, and that is good. We don't want to be a city where people want to leave. We want to be a city where people want to come.
It's terrific to be vibrant and have people wanting to come
But-
here,
but
but
we
you
ha-
can't fit everybody in the world in the borders of the
No,
city.
and so
of
you
Newton.
need to provide housing, and as our population shifts, you know, we have folks who may be 65, 70, 75, their kids have left the house. They have a 3,000 square foot house. They don't really need that anymore. They don't
Well, there's
want that.
the in-law apartment possibility. There's
Sure, but you do want to provide those housing opportunities for them. But at the same time, I think we need to utilize our
small
commercial
rental
areas.
unit housing is something we certainly have a relative lack of. But if you look at these new developments, these aren't small rental units. These are massive condos in these things.
Well, some of the ones, Washington Place, Austin Street, will be rental units. They're not condos.
they're high-end luxury rental in a lot of cases, aren't they?
I think they are. You know, it's interesting. They are certainly higher end housing because, frankly, the demand is there for that.
Sure.
I mean, if you're a developer and you're building in Newton, which is a very desirable community, you're building a new place, people want the up-to-date new fixtures, and they want good fixtures, and they want other amenities, and that.
Well, let me
costs
ask you a
money.
dumb question, Mark.
Yeah.
If you could, because, you know, why not, right? If you could just wave a magic wand and get Newton to where you wanted it to be, how many people would live in Newton?
I have no idea.
I mean, the reason why I ask it, and I know it's an impossible question to answer, that's why I said it's a dumb question, is the idea that people need housing, and so we're going to keep building housing. At a certain point, you just fundamentally transform Newton into a much denser community if you keep doing that. And actually, I was frankly impressed with when now Mayor Fuller sat across the table from me, and I asked her that question. She actually had a number, which I didn't expect. But she said, I think it was like in the 90s. She said, I think we can grow a little more, but we shouldn't grow beyond that. We'd be too dense. So the idea that there's all kinds of populations that want housing or would like to live here, we obviously can't accommodate all of them. So
You couldn't unless you were going to fundamentally shift the way we have housing in the city. Most of our housing is single-family residential and established lots, and there's no will
but we don't want to
change.
become Manhattan, obviously.
And I don't think anyone wants to change that.
Well,
Is the number-
anyone? There's a couple, but
There's plenty of people who do. I would say I wouldn't want to. Do we go to 88,000? Do we go to 91,000? Do we go to 92,000? I don't think there's a magic number. What to me is far more important is what types of housing we're building and how does that fit into our existing neighborhoods.
well,
And
here's
that's the
I
real
asked you the
critical
dumb question. Let me ask you the smart question now.
Ask away.
So, how do we take all the wonderful planning documents and brain power that we have in the city and apply it to achieving a goal? And what I mean by that, with respect to our housing, it always seems to me we're in reactive mode. We get a developer, buys up some land, comes in, says, here's what I want to do, and people go, oh, doesn't look terrible, or kind of terrible, let's make it a little smaller. How do we impose a vision of whether it's your goal or Ruth Ann Fuller's goal or my goal or anybody else's, but say, how do we want Newton to look? What process can we put into place? Or are we putting
We
into
are. Well,
place?
we are. We have a number of things going on right now in the city that I think are very significant. The planning department has created kind of a vision for Needham Street corridor, which I think is generally a good document.
Is that vision more open space and taller buildings? Is that?
It's not just taller. It's not really taller buildings as much as trying to utilize resources like the Charles River better. If you look at Needham Street, the Charles River runs at the edge of Needham Street. It's a very poorly
Well, it
utilized.
crosses right between Newton and Brookline.
It's a poorly utilized resource there, in my view.
How would you use the Charles River?
You could make it more attractive so people could get down there. They could walk along the river. There's open space there. You think about how you utilize that better. You need to think about how you get transport through the village, through the corridor. Washington Street, the mayor's embarked on a visioning process for Washington Street.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
And you know what the question is, right? You know.
No, I don't know what the question
All
is.
right,
You have to
all right.
tell
Well,
me.
my question about that is, and first of all, I've heard that this was really Mayor Warren's initiative. And I've heard that in the context of defending Mayor Fuller, saying she was just following through on something he already had in action, and maybe she didn't think it was that great an idea, which is the idea of a $500,000 no-bid contract. How did you feel about that?
You know, the mayor came in her first, nearly one of her first acts in office, and I think quite rightly said, we have a lot of development going on Washington Street that's proposed. We need to get ahead of it. She came in and I think persuaded us that this company was extremely well equipped to do the job. We don't often, there's lots of times we hire people for service type jobs, law firms, for example, other consultants, where we don't go out and get bids because you don't
$500,000? Has that happened before?
Let me finish.
Okay.
I think the $500,000 was extraordinarily high. My sense is that the city council, in its wisdom, wanted to give our new mayor some benefit of the doubt.
I don't doubt that was part of the
She got
thinking.
the benefit of the doubt. I think it is unlikely that the city council would be as receptive, generally speaking, to that type of request in the future, absent some fairly extraordinary circumstances, unless this group puts together a really first-rate plan. And
Are there
then
any signs of that so far that they're?
I think they've been perceived as doing a very good job, but again, it's very hard to see, and we don't know what their work product is ultimately going to be like. And the other thing, Ken, that you talked about how we talk about our vision for the city, we're embarking on a very substantial effort to rewrite our zoning ordinance. It's been going on for a number of years.
Is there a way we can get out of reactive mode into a more proactive?
Well, that's the zoning
planning?
ordinance does that.
Right. I mean, it does or it doesn't. It could do that.
Depends
Some zoning
what,
ordinances
depends
do.
what's in there.
Exactly.
And-
Is there? Let me rephrase the question. Is there an effort to put stuff in there that will make the city more proactive in terms
Yes
of planning?
and no. I think there is some effort there, and it's an interesting concept of what's called context-based zoning, where you allow certain types of development in certain parts of the city that essentially fit in the context of what's in that part of the city. Whether we're successful with that or not, I don't know. And as I said earlier, language, particularly, this as a lawyer, language is incredibly important. And it's one thing, and we've been talking on the city council now, big picture concepts. The real issue is, what does the language of the code say? For example, are we going to say that you can build housing in the core of the village centers and have less parking associated with it, or no parking? I can make arguments either way. Argument on less parking is, if you have less parking, people will figure out a way to get around without cars.
Well, let me give you the
Go ahead.
example. Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
people complain. I've heard so many people complain, and I'm sure you've heard this too. Too many banks, especially in Newton Center, in some of our village centers. 8, 12 banks. I can tell you recently, before taking a trip to Europe, I needed to get some euros. And so I literally walked into every bank in Newton Center, and they were all empty. And the final bank, actually, there was a second person in the final bank, and they actually had euros, which was nice because I was catching a plane at Logan that evening. So but everyone complains, too many banks. And so somebody said, well, if only we got rid of the parking requirements, then there wouldn't be as many banks. The reason why there's so many banks is they don't need parking. Well, I think the reason why there's so many banks is they're there for their marketing presence.
It's not,
my question is, why don't we simply zone it for the uses we want? Create a business district that doesn't allow banks except by special permit.
You have to be very careful in your zoning requirements that you don't do things that are illegal. And I don't know, without consulting with the law department, whether you could write a no banks type of zone. The problem is, I don't think it is the banks have anything to do with the parking requirements. The fact is that banks have tremendous economic power. They have a lot of resources, and for them, the visibility of having locations
it's marketing, which,
is
by the
very
way,
important.
which to me is totally analogous to the retail marijuana shops. They don't need 8 of them in Newton so that people can get.
I'm going to
their
stay
marijuana.
away. We've talked enough about marijuana.
I think it's marketing. But I think that's why the bank. It's the same point. Is they're there to market their brand.
We are going to also face when it comes to retail. Anybody who has a computer knows how to shop on Amazon or other online services now. I shop on Amazon. I think it's great.
Sure.
I get to
I bought a colander on Amazon today.
I get
and
to
I can see the ratings and everyone stainless
I
steel.
get to sit. I need window wells for my basement windows. Go on Amazon and they'll deliver it to your house. You know, you need a new garden hose.
That's a good idea. I was going to go to Home Depot and get one. I may just do that.
You may do that. But you can shop for clothing. You can shop for a myriad
Full
of things.
disclosure, my sister-in-law works for Amazon.
Full disclosure. But my point is that experience is changing retail tremendously. So we need to think about that. But
well, that's the question. Are we? Do we have a process in place to proactively apply all this brain power and put it into our zoning code in a way that will actually take us out of the reactive mode that we've been in for years, where a very smart young lawyer, or not so young in some cases, comes to us with their petition, right? And they come up to the podium, they've got all their sets of drawings and their engineering thing, and they say, this is the proposal. And I dealt with this for my 18 years on the Board of Aldermen, where what are you going to do? Say no? This looks
well, you could say no, and we do say no, but I'll say this, Ken.
Right, but if it's ridiculous, you say no.
But the zoning ordinance deliberately provides certain things are allowed and certain things are not. What's interesting with the proposed zoning code changes, the proposal actually will make it easier in some instances to do certain things in business districts without a special permit, such as getting rid of some of the parking requirements that we've associated with restaurants and other facilities. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because when they come to us, we almost invariably grant the special permit.
But doesn't it just raise the threshold even more? Isn't that a chance to?
It depends how it's drafted. Again, if the public wants to be involved here, that's the issue the public ought to be paying attention to.
What do you think about this multi-use 4-district moratorium that's been proposed while this planning process is in place?
That's a pending matter before the council, so I'm not going to comment.
Well, I mean, to the extent it's a legislative matter, it's not a.
Let me just.
It's not a special permit. You can comment on it.
Let me.
No?
What I was going to say is, as a general rule, I am not in favor of moratoriums.
Okay.
I don't think moratoriums generally solve your problems. And an exception would be with the new marijuana laws, where we did put a moratorium in place because we had no law. And you have to craft law.
My question, forget about moratorium. Is there any way to keep the status quo while we figure out while this planning process, while this consultant is doing?
That's what the moratorium proponents are proposing. I think what's really going to happen is we're going to have some very intense debates in this city about the zoning code, and the reason for that is what we put in the zoning code will define what is permissible and what is allowed, and you know this, but the viewers may not.
We have very, very smart viewers.
We do well, but this is something we have excellent viewers. But zoning is
because they're Newton residents.
They are. Zoning has some bright line rules, and then a lot of exceptions, what are called special permits. And special permits are actually a very good thing, because what they say is, look, we're going to allow you to do a whole bunch of things, but you got to get approval for it.
And you need to have some public benefit.
And you have to have some public benefit. You have to have conditions on it. And we do that, for example, with any large commercial project.
Right.
And that's good.
So my question then is, let's just take a real specific example here. developer comes in, says the cost on the community, the impact on traffic is going to be X because this is the number of vehicle trips that are generated, and this is the number of kids that are going to be in the schools. And there was a proposal years ago, I think probably before you were on the council, then Board of Aldermen, that said, let's do what a lot of other cities and towns do and required big developers to pay money into a fund that we can have our own, that would fund our own outside experts to do our own studies. And I don't remember if that ever,
We do that in bigger projects. On bigger projects, the developers are expected to pay for independent, what's called peer review, where they are, there's peer reviewer that goes on the project, so a traffic study and other things.
Well, let me get real specific then. Washington Place, the developer claimed that there would be 10 to 12 children added to the public schools. The school committee, in their enrollment analysis report, looked at that project once it was approved by the city council and said, no, there'll be twice that number, 20 to 25, slightly more than twice that number on average, children in the public schools based on what they've seen from similar developments in Newton in the past. They looked at Avalon, they looked at comparable unit sizes. And so either the developer was wrong or the school committee is wrong. I tend to believe our school committee. So but that was the number that was apparently relied upon by the city council.
You know, Ken, we have to be very careful when it comes to counting school children. We actually, under fair housing laws, have to be exceptionally cautious about prohibiting or limiting development based on the number of school children who may be coming into our system. We should understand the implications.
I'm not suggesting, Mark, that we vote no on something, but I am suggesting that we have a plan to have the infrastructure in place. Let's talk about the school infrastructure for a second. Right now, you probably know this Horace Mann Elementary School, according to the enrollment analysis report and the school committee's current numbers, is at 122% of capacity. Franklin, 105%, or is that an 8? Can't tell, read my own writing here. Have it on another page. Franklin's at 105% of capacity. We have 900 students approximately at Brown Middle School, close to 1,000 a day. The projections are the middle school population is going to increase dramatically. And these aren't speculative projections. This is based on the kids already in elementary school in Newton. Our middle schools are stuffed to the gills, and that's without any of this new development. So what's our plan, Mark, to get ahead of the curve so we're not always in reaction mode? Let me just tell my one reaction mode story that was before your time you were on the school committee on the time maybe, but remember when we had a need for another middle school, it was then a 2-year junior high, and we put it across the street from the other one. Oak Hill, we turned into were you on?
I was not in the school committee, but you know the history of that, Ken. The history of that is in the 80s, after I graduated the high school, we started to have a decline in our school population.
Right. And we closed a lot of schools.
And a very significant decline.
Well, at one point, we were down to two-year junior high citywide. Right. My point is, Mark, we always seem like we're in reaction mode rather than planning for
I actually have to strongly disagree with that. I don't think we're in reaction mode to the school population. The school committee has vigorously looked at the school enrollments. It is done a very good job at it. It's very easy, Ken, to predict what your school enrollment is going to be like from one year to the next. Yes, you may have a variation.
For the next 5 years, their projections can be pretty good.
5, 6, 7 years is very hard, and I'll tell you why. You have almost no idea what the birth rates are going to be of people moving into the city 6, 7 years from now.
No, I'm talking within 5 years, at least according to...
Within 5 years, you can you certainly project middle school and high school, based on your elementary school enrollments, what you're going to get. It's the kindergarten enrollment that's very hard. And as Newton has become, unfortunately, a more expensive community to live in, a first-time family that may be living in Brighton or the Back Bay may not move to Newton to their first child's 4.5.
So here's the question, really. We know these things. We know that, as we discussed before, the ratio of commercial to residential development has a big effect on our budget. We know we can't look at an individual project in reaction mode, as I'm calling it, and say, oh, too many kids in our schools, we don't want to be discriminating against children. We all love children. We all have children, right? Most of the members of the city council are big fans of children, right? We don't want to do that. But on the other hand, we don't want to put kids into closet, which is literally where they've been taught
But Ken,
over the years.
I got to say this. I appreciate what you're saying, but we are embarking on we've embarked on a very ambitious school improvement program in this city. We built a new high school a number of years ago. We expanded in Newton South. We have
Oh,
done,
I thought you said a number. I thought you meant Newton South was the new high school we built.
no,
It was.
It was, but that was in the 60s. We've now built a new Ainger school, a new Zervis school.
But we have the same number of elementary schools.
No, but Ainger and Zervis have a significantly larger capacity, as does Cabot, which is under construction. So, yes, you may have the same number of elementary schools.
What about middle school capacity? Have we addressed that?
Middle school capacity has been tougher for us because we are limited in space. It is very difficult to expand. Bigelow is almost impossible to expand on the site. There's been some expansion of Day, some new classrooms at Day. You can expand.
But Day is already huge. Day is already at about 1,000 kids.
I think we have to be careful about using words like huge.
Well,
okay?
I mean, talking to school committee members, they've told me they don't think it's educationally optimal to have that big a school because you tried for the school play. There's that many other.
I would certainly like to see in an ideal world, I'd like to see all our middle schools of roughly the same population. The fact of the matter is Day can hold more students than Bigelow can, and you have to face that reality. Are we going to have a fifth?
And Brown can hold more than Oak Hill,
That's
of
right.
course.
Are we going to have a fifth middle school? Almost impossible to find a site for it. You know how hard it was to find a site for the fourth one? In part
Indeed.
because the city gave away or sold or leased Weeks and
Warren, right.
And you know what? It's easy
for housing.
And for housing, but it's easy for those of us 20 years later to say that was not a good decision. I think our city leaders at the time used their best judgment and seeing what they could do.
They suffered from what I'm describing as reaction mode. Seemed like a good idea, but without long-term planning.
But Ken, I think they thought about it long term. They just didn't. They unfortunately did not anticipate that our school population would have such a shift.
But if you look at the history of the city, Mark, it's always gone up and down like a sine wave. So they should have
That's not
realized
true.
that
The only time it went up significantly was as the city greatly expanded after World War II. And the city became very different. You built Oak Hill Park, you built other things. The peak of school enrollment was probably back when I was in second grade in like 1967. Okay, that's the peak enrollment. We had, I think, 18,000 students in the school system. Why?
And when I was there, I think it was 10.
Right, and why? Because it was a baby boomer population.
Right.
I mean, we had the post-World War II
that's
generation.
why that you
had their
get
kids.
this fluctuation, because you get the aging of the city. People eventually die or move, and then those houses open up and young families move in.
We're back up, but we're nowhere near the level of where we were in the late 60s, early 70s. Look, Ken, when I graduated Newton North High School, there were maybe 900 kids in my graduating class,
Wow.
okay? When
there wasn't.
you probably had far less. When my
Well, I was at South, and we had 300 in my class, but North was like twice as big as South.
Well, now the
or
two
maybe even a
schools
little more.
now the two schools are roughly even. And when my oldest son graduated high school, he probably had 500 or so students in his graduating class. Very different.
All right. Let's we talked zoning in general.
Yep.
I want to ask you about inclusionary zoning. You've seen this memo. I'm not pulling any surprises on you. This is a memo dated January 31st of this year from the chief planner in the planning department to the city council, so to you and your colleagues, CC to the mayor and whatnot, discussing whether Newton is at the 1.5% threshold that would exempt us from the mandatory portion of the 40B housing inclusionary zoning. But in other words, let me rephrase that. Right, if we got to that threshold, we'd have a safe harbor. We would be able to say yes or no to a project. Right now, we have very limited ability to say yes or no.
No, we can say yes or no to a project, but I think you need to step back a little bit here, Ken.
Well, let me get to my question, then I'll step
Fair
back.
enough.
I'm trying to set the context. You can correct me if I get any of the facts wrong in setting up the question, but the question is essentially, we heard from the City of Newton Law Department in 2017, I believe, that we had achieved the 1.5% safe harbor threshold, and now we're hearing that we no longer achieved it. And as you said, I'm a lawyer. I've read lots of complicated and confusing legal documents. This is a 3-page memo that makes absolutely no sense to me. I do not understand how I can understand how the numerator could have changed, the number of affordable housing units, but how the land area in the city, because this is a ratio of affordable housing units to land area, how it changed. And it doesn't, and I understand maybe there's legal definitions involved. I don't see that explanation here. And I would love to have you enlighten me as to how we went from over.
I'm not going to be able in the 5 minutes we have left here to enlighten you on what's inherently an incredibly difficult legal issue. Let's step back a little bit, though, and talk about 40B. 40B, for those who may or may not know it, is a state law, and it mandates that unless you have a certain level, 10% of affordable housing in a city, and affordable housing is a defined term,
Sure.
that a developer can override zoning laws and put out what's called a 40B project.
Right, there's 2 different safe harbors. There's one is based on land area, the other is based on percentage of housing stock.
Right. And so we don't meet the percentage of housing stock.
Right. That one
we all agree on it.
Yeah,
but the idea behind 40B is a very well-intentioned law. The intention behind the law is to get more affordable housing all over the Commonwealth. The problem, and I say this as someone who's had to deal with this issue, the problem is it's a well-intentioned law with a lot of unintended consequences, because what it does is it allows developers, and these are developers who are often making profit, and sometimes substantial profit, on housing development, to use 40B as leverage.
Bait and switches. They threaten it.
They come to the city council and say, unless you grant my special permit, I will exercise my right to put in the development I want.
They scare the neighborhood. They absolutely terrorize
with a 40B development, which you will have very little ability to control. And that's a real threat.
And it's a lack of local control, absolutely the problem.
So
the question is, I thought we were safe from that and we would have that local control, and now we apparently don't again, and it confuses the heck out of me.
Ken, the problem is how you define the land mass that is being governed by whether or not you have a
Was it about whether we include golf courses? I mean, if someone could explain to me, this is the parcel of land we were including and we're not anymore, I would understand it.
I don't have the details in front of me, but I do think it relates to when you include land for housing, are you including certain types of open space? Are you including golf courses? Are you including other things? It is a very complicated analysis.
Sure.
And I expect if someone wants to push this, that's yet another issue that's
I would love to see clarity on it, though. Someone would say, this is what we're counting, this is what we're not counting.
Suggest you ask our legal department.
I don't think I get to ask that question. Maybe you could.
Well,
I got to ask questions when I was on the council, and I'm just a citizen now. But I think, Mark, seriously, it would be helpful to have a side-by-side. This was the first analysis. This is the new analysis. I believe that you can read this memo as many times as you want and not get any smarter or any more knowledgeable reading it.
I'll have to defer. I'm not going to take I can't read it with the intensity and the concentration in the 2 minutes we have left.
No. But I'm not asking you tonight. I'm saying between now and the next time you're on the show.
Appreciate that.
If you can help me figure this one out, I would be so grateful.
Ken, I'll try to educate you. How's that?
Thank you. I am educable. I was once told that by a teacher. Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about, but you are educable.
I have no doubt that you are. Anyway,
well, we got through a lot, actually.
Good.
We didn't get through everything here. But I'll let you have the last word here. And one wish for the city of Newton in the next year, one thing you could accomplish, what would it be?
I'd say this. I want to make sure that we continue to have respectful civil dialogue in the city. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be passionate about our opinions. I think we should be.
Do you think we haven't been civil in the city?
I think we generally do actually a very good job of it, but we have a national...
Compared to the national conversation.
I was going to say, we have a national climate right now which does not have that level of civility.
Well, on that note of civility, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure to have you, Mark.
Appreciate it.
Thank you to our wonderful director, Will, our wonderful crew, Eric and John, to everyone at New TV. And thank you so much to those of you at home for watching. Please join us again next time, the second Thursday of the month, when we try to find just a little bit more common ground.
Welcome to Understood.org, a free online resource for parents of kids with learning and attention issues, with personalized recommendations, tools, and expert advice.